The champagne was French, stolen from a British officer's quarters in Hong Kong 3 days earlier. It fizzed in glasses held by men whose hands had signed the orders that sent thousands to their deaths. In the war room beneath Tokyo's Imperial General Headquarters, on the night of December 8, 1941, the Empire of Japan celebrated its greatest triumph. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto did not drink that he stood near the window, watching rain streak down the glass, listening to the laughter behind him. They were toasting Pearl Harbor. They were toasting the burning American battleships, the twisted wreckage of aircraft, the bodies floating in the oil-slicked harbor. They were toasting what they believed was the beginning of total victory. Yamamoto knew better that he had walked the streets of Boston as a young officer, studying at Harvard University in 1919. He had served as naval attaché in Washington, attending parties where American industrialists spoke casually of building 10,000 aircraft or 100 new ships as if discussing the weather. He had driven through the farmlands of the Midwest, watching endless fields of wheat roll past his window, understanding that this single nation could feed half the world. He had visited Detroit, where automobiles rolled off assembly lines in numbers that made Japanese factories look like village workshops. The men celebrating behind him had never seen these things. They spoke of American weakness, of a soft democracy that could not stomach war, of a mongrel nation without the spiritual purity of Japan. They believed their own propaganda. General Hajime Sugiyama raised his glass. 6 months, he declared. Perhaps less. The Americans will sue for peace before cherry blossom season. Yamamoto turned from the window. His face was calm, but his eyes held something the others could not read. And if they do not? The room grew quiet. Prime Minister Hideki Tojo stepped forward, adjusting his round spectacles. Admiral, you planned this magnificent attack yourself. Surely you do not doubt our victory? I planned an attack, Yamamoto said quietly. I did not plan a war. There is a difference. He moved to the great map that dominated one wall. The Pacific Ocean stretched blue and vast between two worlds. His finger traced the distance from Tokyo to Los Angeles. 7,000 miles of water. Beyond that, a continent 3,000 miles wide. Mountains. Deserts. Plains. Cities. And everywhere, factories. Do you know how much steel America produces each year? Yamamoto asked. Sugiyama waved his hand dismissively. Numbers on paper mean nothing against Japanese spirit. 80 million tons, Yamamoto continued, as if the general had not spoken. Japan produces 7 million. Do you understand what that means? For every warship we build, they can build 10. For every aircraft, 20. For every tank, every shell, every bullet, they can bury us in steel. The silence deepened. Some of the younger officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Yamamoto turned to face them fully. I spent years in America. I know these people. They are not weak. They are not soft. They are asleep. And we have just woken them up. Tojo's expression hardened. What would you have us do, Admiral? Surrender before we have even begun? I would have you understand what we face. Yamamoto's voice remained steady. We have perhaps 6 months, maybe a year, to win everything we can. After that, their industrial power will begin to tell. After 2 years, we will be fighting for our survival. After 3. He paused. There will be no after 3. Later, when the celebration had ended and the others had gone, a young lieutenant approached Yamamoto. The boy was barely 20, his uniform still crisp and new. Admiral, he said hesitantly, some of the officers speak of invading the American mainland. After we consolidate our Pacific gains, perhaps we could strike at California. Force them to defend their own shores. Yamamoto looked at the young man for a long moment. Then he did something rare. He almost smiled, though there was no warmth in it. Lieutenant, do you know what I saw in America? I saw football stadiums that held 80,000 people. I saw highways stretching to the horizon. I saw farmers with more machinery than some of our army divisions. I saw a nation so vast that you could fit all of Japan into it 30 times and still have room left over. He placed his hand on the map, covering the painted shape of the United States. We cannot invade America. We can hurt them. We can surprise them. But we cannot touch that continent. It is beyond our reach. It has always been beyond our reach. The only question is how long it takes them to realize their true strength, and how many of our young men will die before they do. The lieutenant bowed and withdrew, his face pale. Yamamoto stood alone in the empty room, his hand still resting on the map. Outside, the rain continued to fall on Tokyo. Somewhere across the Pacific, in a harbor still burning, America was waking up, and he knew, with terrible certainty, that he had helped create a monster that would one day consume everything he loved. Lieutenant Commander Takeshi Mori had not slept in 3 days. The papers on his desk had multiplied like a disease, each one carrying numbers that made his stomach clench. He worked in a basement office in the Navy Ministry, a place where truth was calculated and then buried before it could reach the men who made decisions. His job was simple: track American industrial production. His nightmare was simpler still: the numbers never lied. That it was April 1942. Japan stood at the height of its power. The Philippines had fallen. Singapore, the great British fortress, had surrendered with 80,000 troops. The Dutch East Indies, rich with oil, belonged to the empire. Japanese soldiers stood on the borders of India. The rising sun flag flew over an empire stretching from the frozen Aleutians to the jungles of New Guinea, and none of it mattered. Mori spread his latest charts across the desk. American aircraft production, 4,000 per month and climbing. Japanese production, 700. American shipyard output, a new warship every few days. Japanese shipyards struggled to complete one per week. The lines on his graphs diverged like roads leading to different worlds, one toward survival, one toward oblivion. That he heard footsteps on the stairs. Commander Minoru Genda appeared, the brilliant tactician who had designed the Pearl Harbor attack. His face was drawn, exhausted. The victory celebrations of December had given way to the grinding reality of war. "You have the new figures?" Genda asked. Mori handed over the papers. American steel production has increased by 15% since the war began. Their automobile factories have converted to military production. Ford is building B-24 bombers now. One every hour. Every hour? Genda's voice was flat, disbelieving. Every hour. 24 each day. 700 each month. From one factory. Genda sat down heavily. He had studied the American Navy for years, had found the weakness in their Pacific defenses, had crafted the perfect attack. But you could not attack factories in Michigan. You could not torpedo assembly lines in California. You could not bomb the steel mills of Pittsburgh from carriers anchored in the Pacific. "There is talk of Midway," Genda said finally. "A decisive battle. We destroy their remaining carriers, and they will have to negotiate." Mori shook his head slowly. "Commander, even if we sink every carrier they have, they will build more. The yards at Newport News, at Philadelphia, at Puget Sound, they are already laying down keels for dozens of new ships. Essex-class carriers. Bigger and stronger than anything we have. How long until they launch? The first ones? Late this year. By 1943, they will have more carriers in the Pacific than we have ever possessed. By 1944. Mori spread his hands. By 1944, they will have more aircraft carriers than we have destroyers. Genda stared at the charts. The numbers were clear. The math was undeniable. Japan had won every battle of the first 4 months. They would likely win more in the months to come. But wars were not won by battles alone. Wars were won by factories, by resources, by the brutal arithmetic of production. Does anyone else see these figures? Genda asked. I send reports to the General Staff. They do not reply. They do not want to know. No. They do not want to know. Genda stood and walked to the small window, looking up at a patch of gray Tokyo sky. At Pearl Harbor, we sank 8 battleships. The Americans have already raised 6 of them. They are being repaired, refitted. They will return to service. Yes. We cannot do that. When we lose a ship, it is gone. Yes. The silence between them held the weight of everything unsaid. Somewhere above, in the polished offices of generals and admirals, men were planning the next offensive, the next conquest. They spoke of Japanese spirit, of Bushido, of the divine destiny of the empire. They did not speak of steel tonnage or oil reserves or the 16 million American men who had registered for the draft. Genda turned back to Mori. There is one thing I do not understand. The Americans, they are a democracy. Their people do not want war. Their newspapers argued against involvement. Why do they not simply accept our gains and make peace? Mori thought of his uncle, who had lived in California before the war, who had written letters describing a strange and confusing people. Commander, my uncle once told me something. He said Americans are slow to anger. They are disorganized and distracted and often foolish. But when they are hurt, truly hurt, they become something else. They become united. They become focused. They become relentless. And we hurt them. We hurt them badly. We killed their sons. We humiliated their navy. We woke something that was sleeping. Genda picked up the charts, studied them one more time, then handed them back. Keep making your reports, Lieutenant Commander. Even if no one reads them. Someday, someone will want to know how we failed to see what was right in front of us. After Genda left, Mori sat alone in his basement office. He lit a cigarette and watched the smoke curl toward the ceiling. The numbers surrounded him, patient and merciless. They would still be true tomorrow. They would still be true next month, next year. The war would end the way the numbers demanded. The garden was ancient, its stones placed by hands dead for 3 centuries. Maple leaves drifted down like drops of blood, settling on the surface of a pond where koi fish swam in slow circles. It was October 1943, and Japan was dying, not that anyone was permitted to say so. Former Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo knelt on the wooden veranda, watching his guest approach. Colonel Kenji Watanabe moved carefully through the garden, checking twice over his shoulder before climbing the steps. A meeting like this was dangerous. The Kempitai, the military police, had eyes everywhere. Speaking honestly about the war could mean imprisonment or worse, but some truths could no longer be ignored. Midway, Watanabe said quietly, settling onto the tatami beside Togo. That was 17 months ago. We lost 4 carriers in a single afternoon. The Americans have built 12 new ones since then. Togo nodded. He had served as ambassador to Germany and the Soviet Union. He understood power, understood diplomacy, understood the difference between propaganda and reality. The reality was catastrophic. Guadalcanal, Togo replied. We lost it after 6 months of fighting. 30,000 soldiers dead or captured. The Americans lost fewer than 2,000. And now they advance everywhere. The Pacific had become a graveyard of Japanese ambitions. The Gilbert Islands had fallen. The Marshalls were under attack. American submarines, once dismissed as irrelevant, now hunted Japanese merchant ships with terrifying efficiency. Oil that should have fueled warships rotted in tanks at Borneo because the tankers that carried it lay broken on the ocean floor. The empire was strangling. I spoke with Prince Higashikuni last week, Watanabe said. He is deeply troubled. He asked me a question I could not answer: how do we end this war without destroying Japan? Togo poured tea, his movements precise and controlled. The same question keeps me awake at night. The military speaks of decisive battles, of turning points. They speak of Bushido, of death before surrender. But they do not speak of what comes after. There is no after. Not the way they plan it. Watanabe's voice was bitter. I served in Washington, Minister. I walked through their factories. I saw what they are building. They are not making weapons for a short war. They are making weapons for total victory. Bombers that can fly higher than our fighters can reach. Warships so advanced our torpedoes cannot sink them. And they are building them by the thousands. A servant appeared with fresh tea. They fell silent until she withdrew. The Americans cannot be touched, Watanabe continued. That is what the High Command never understood. We stretched our forces across an ocean, across 1,000 islands. They can concentrate everything they have. Their homeland is untouchable. Ours, he did not finish the sentence. He did not need to, Togo sipped his tea slowly. There are others who see what we see. Navy officers, diplomats, some in the imperial household. We meet in secret. We talk around the edges of the truth because speaking directly is too dangerous. What do you discuss? Peace. The word hung in the air like smoke. A negotiated settlement. Perhaps through the Soviets, perhaps through neutral channels. Something that preserves the emperor, preserves the nation, before there is nothing left to preserve. Watanabe shook his head. Tojo will never permit it. The army controls the government. They would rather see every city burned than accept defeat. Then every city will burn. Togo's voice was calm, almost detached, but his hands trembled slightly as he set down his cup. The Americans have developed a new bomber. The B-29. It can fly from the Marianas to Tokyo and back. When they capture those islands, and they will begin burning Japan from the sky. Somewhere in the garden, a crow called out, harsh and sharp. I received a report yesterday, Watanabe said. American production figures. They built 96,000 aircraft last year. 96,000. Do you know how many we built? 28,000. And of those, half were training planes or obsolete models. Togo closed his eyes. The mathematics of defeat. You could not argue with numbers. You could not inspire steel. You could not use Bushido to sink aircraft carriers. There was a moment, he said softly, in 1941, when this might have ended differently. If we had stopped after the initial conquests. If we had consolidated, fortified, offered to negotiate. The Americans were not prepared for a long war. Their people were divided. Perhaps. Watanabe's voice was gentle. But that moment is gone. We are committed now. The only question is how many must die before the inevitable arrives. They sat in silence as the afternoon shadows lengthened. In the pond, the koi fish continued their endless circles, unaware of the war, unaware of the fire that would soon rain from the sky. Keep speaking, Colonel, Togo said finally. Keep meeting with those who see clearly. The tide will turn within our own government, just as it has turned in the Pacific. And when it does, we must be ready. And if we are arrested before that day comes? Togo looked up at the sky, where somewhere, impossibly far away, American factories were pouring out the instruments of Japan's destruction. Then others will carry the truth forward. The truth always survives. It is the lies that die. Watanabe bowed and departed through the autumn leaves. Togo remained, watching the shadows grow. The fire came on the night of March 9, 1945. 300 B-29 bombers swept over Tokyo at low altitude, releasing clusters of incendiary bombs that burst into rivers of flame. The wind carried the fire from block to block, devouring the wooden houses, the temples, the schools, the hospitals. By morning, 16 square miles of the city had become ash. 100,000 people had died in a single night. Lieutenant Commander Takashi Mori stood in the ruins of his childhood neighborhood. His mother's house was gone. The temple where he had prayed as a boy was gone. The street where he had played with friends, children now grown into soldiers, most of them dead on islands with names he had once seen only on charts, was gone. The numbers had been right. They had always been right. That he made his way through the devastation to the Navy Ministry, where fragments of the bureaucracy still functioned in underground bunkers. The war continued, though everyone now knew how it would end. Okinawa was falling. American ships surrounded Japan in an iron ring. The submarines had killed so many tankers that the remaining warships sat motionless in harbors, useless without fuel, and still, the hardliners spoke of victory. I and the Supreme War Council, men debated plans for Ketsugo, the final battle for the homeland. They spoke of arming civilians with bamboo spears. They spoke of kamikaze attacks on a massive scale. They spoke of 100 million Japanese dying with honor rather than surrendering. Foreign Minister Togo, returned to office in April, listened to their madness with growing horror. He thought of the garden meeting with Colonel Watanabe, now dead, killed in the firebombing of Osaka. He thought of all the whispered conversations, the secret hopes for peace. He thought of the emperor, silent and unknowable, trapped between tradition and annihilation. August 6 changed everything. The first atomic bomb fell on Hiroshima at 8:15 in the morning. 80,000 people died in the first seconds. By the end of the year, radiation would push the death toll above 140,000. A single bomb. A single aircraft. A weapon that made all the firebombings look like campfires. Mori received the report in his basement office. He read it 3 times, trying to understand. The Americans had harnessed the power of the atom itself. They had built a weapon that Japan could not copy, could not counter, could not survive. And they had built it in secret factories in places called Oak Ridge and Los Alamos, places so distant, so protected, that Japan had never even known they existed. This was the final truth. This was what it meant to fight a nation that could not be touched. On August 8, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan. 1 million Soviet soldiers poured into Manchuria, crushing the Guangdong army in days. The back door was open. There was no escape. On August 9, a second atomic bomb fell on Nagasaki. The Supreme War Council met in an underground bunker, debating while the world collapsed above them. War Minister Korechika Anami argued for continuing the fight. Navy Minister Mitsumasa Yonai spoke of reality. Togo pleaded for acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration, for surrender with the single condition that the emperor be preserved. The vote was deadlocked. 3 for surrender, 3 for continued war, and then the emperor spoke that it was unprecedented. The divine sovereign, raised above politics, above debate, entered the room and gave his judgment. His voice was soft, controlled, but his words carried the weight of centuries. He spoke of enduring the unendurable. He spoke of the suffering of his people. He spoke of the need to preserve the nation for future generations. That he chose surrender. On August 15, his voice crackled over radio speakers across the broken empire. Millions listened, soldiers on distant islands, civilians in bombed-out cities, farmers in untouched villages. The war was over. Mori heard the broadcast in his basement office. Around him, the papers and charts that had predicted this moment for years were stacked like accusations. He had known since 1942. They had all known, those who dared to look at the numbers. But knowing had not been enough. He walked outside, into the ruins of Tokyo. The August sun beat down on the rubble. Survivors moved through the streets, their faces blank with shock. Somewhere, a child was crying. Mori thought of Admiral Yamamoto, dead for 2 years now, shot down over the Pacific. Yamamoto had understood from the beginning. We have awakened a sleeping giant. The giant had risen. The giant had crossed the ocean that was supposed to protect Japan. The giant had reached into the heart of the nation and torn it apart, and Japan had never touched American soil, not once. Mori reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded map, worn soft from years of handling. The United States of America. He had traced its outline 1,000 times, measuring distances, calculating impossibilities. 7,000 miles of ocean. 3,000 miles of continent. Mountains, deserts, plains, cities. The factories of Detroit, the shipyards of California, the laboratories where they had split the atom itself, that a mountain that could not be moved, that he stood in the ruins of his country, holding the map of the nation that had destroyed it, and finally allowed himself to weep. The war was over. The question that should have been asked in 1941 had finally been answered, and the answer had cost millions of lives.